This is the second in our series of 3 seminars, which are designed to support organisations to understand the process of policy influencing and the role it can play in facilitating change. We hope this introductory series will help you think about and potentially identify and increase opportunities of where you can have influence yourselves. So these seminars are part of Clinks' new Stronger Voice project, which seeks to ensure that the voluntary sector has a strong, confident and unified voice and is equipped with the skills and confidence to influence effectively. So we will be delivering other online training events in the future, so please watch out for e-bulletins in our light lunch. So back to today, the seminar will be led by Christopher Stacey. Chris is the coordinator of Unlock, an independent award-winning charity that provides a voice and support for people who are facing stigma and obstacles because of their criminal record. He leads the charity's policy and advocacy work and oversees the charity's activities, projects and communications, including work to support and challenge employers to change their recruitment policies and practices, work to prevent unlawful criminal records checks, influencing government policy, and working on other policy issues, including access to higher education. He is one of the country's foremost experts on the criminal record disclosure regime and the long-term barriers of criminal records. As he will talk about today, Chris led Unlock's successful crowd justice campaign and legal intervention in a Supreme Court hearing on the disclosure of criminal records, which led to changes in 2020. I will therefore hand over to Chris for the presentation, and thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Thank you. Really good to see you all. Always strange speaking to a range of black boxes, but good to see lots of familiar faces. And thank you, Sophie, and to Clinks for inviting me. What I'm planning to do is speak for the next 30 minutes or so. And I'm going to navigate some slides, so hopefully you can see my screen. And I'm happy for these to be shared afterwards, so there's no need to take any notes, but I've got a few things that I want to share. And I guess just a reflection on the Clinks Stronger Voices project. I think it's really important piece of work, so great to see so many of you here to look at the role of charities in influencing policy and achieving systemic change, because that's a crucial role for charities within criminal justice. And it's great to see Clinks doing this work to support the sector in doing this kind of work, because it isn't easy work. So as Sophie said, I'm co-director of Unlock. For those that haven't come across Unlock before, it's a national independent advocacy charity that supports, speaks up and campaigns for people that are facing stigma, prejudice and discrimination because of their criminal record. I've been at the charity for nearly 13 years, co-director for 8 of those. It's quite a coincidental time to be doing this event. It was, as Sophie will know, organised back in November. And at that time, I didn't know what I now know, which is I'll be joining Clinks as of next month. So it's a bit of a strange time for me to be at a Clinks event in an Unlock capacity, but really glad to still be here in an Unlock capacity. I will apologise if I still use language like we, because I've spent 13 years at Unlock, so it's quite a strange time for me. And I'm looking forward to meeting many of you in my new role at Clinks in the coming months. So what I wanted to start to do is just set a little bit of background to Unlock's approach as a charity. There are lots of different shapes and sizes of charities in criminal justice, and some of the things about Unlock's approach I think are key in shaping how we've gone about influencing policy, and in particular on the legal work that I'm going to talk to you about today. So Unlock is an independent charity. It doesn't take any government funding, and that is a principled decision for the charity. It very much was set up by and involves people with criminal records. So a lot of the staff team, volunteers, half of the trustee board have criminal records, and that's an important part of the charity. Unlock is a very small charity. It has an approach of achieving big things, but staying very much unique in its role within the criminal justice system. Working in partnership, and I'll come back to this later, is a key principle of any small charity, but particularly in Unlock's work around what I'm talking to you about today. And fundamentally, I think what this work that I'm talking to you about today really came from is an approach that has been core to what Unlock is about, which is having what Unlock describes as an ear to the ground and a voice at the top. And I'll come back to that a little bit more later on. So Unlock's work more broadly is split into two parts. The first is that we help people. So we do things like we run a helpline, we have an information site, things like a disclosure calculator, and all of that stuff is to help the 11 million plus people in the UK that have a criminal record. But importantly, that provides what Unlock describes as an ear to the ground to what then becomes a voice at the top, which is about advocating for change. So trying to change and resolve and solve some of those issues that people are facing. And that means a few different things. There are two key focuses when it comes to criminal records. The first is around what gets disclosed, and the second is around how criminal records are used. And today I'm really talking about what gets disclosed, as you'll learn a little bit more about in a second. And Unlock has four key ways of working in our advocacy work. The first is around having projects that tackle specific issues like employment, and more recently for Unlock, access to higher education. Unlock has a key policy function, so working, influencing government departments. The approach is taken by the Ministry of Justice, the Home Office and others in the way that they develop policies and practices. Carrying out research, so understanding the issues and presenting that data to change makers in presenting the case for change. And then finally, the fourth key area of work, which is what I'm talking to you about today, is what we call strategic litigation. That is essentially using the law to advocate for change. So not to assume much understanding of the issue that I'm talking about today, if I can just step back and describe a couple of things that might be helpful context. So there's over 11 million people in the UK with a criminal record. About a third of people claiming job seekers allowance have a criminal record. About 3/4 of employers admit to rejecting applicants that have to disclose a criminal record. And we know that having a job is a crucial factor in reducing reoffending. Yet, as things stand, a criminal record is for life, and in so many different ways, that criminal record continues to punish and marginalize people because of things that they have done in the past. And that really sets us up to what we went on to do in terms of strategic litigation. So I want to look at three things. Firstly, I want to talk about the background to the legal challenge that we were involved in. And then I want to talk a little bit about what has actually changed as a result, and then draw on a few reflections that I have around how we went about that, and maybe some things that other charities might want to consider. So I've got some notes, I've got these slides, but I want to take a pretty informal approach to taking us through this, and then we'll have some time for questions and a discussion. So please do get thinking of any questions that you have, pop them in the chat, and we'll have some time in a little while. So in looking at the background, we didn't wake up one day and think, let's get involved in a legal challenge. That wasn't what we were planning to do. About 12 years ago, so a couple of years after I joined the charity, Alan Johnson was the Home Secretary, so that's feels like a very different world. And at the time, there were some legal challenges to what information the police could hold in terms of criminal records. And we knew about that work because people were contacting us about it, and it had some profile in the press. The government changed, and in 2010, Theresa May, again, it feels like a long time ago, was the Home Secretary. And she set up an independent advisory panel to look at this issue of criminal record disclosure. And that was in her role at the Home Office, because they have a role in being responsible for this policy alongside the Ministry of Justice. And I vividly remember at that time having to pretty much fight to have a seat at the table of that advisory panel. We were, at that time, a very small charity. Unlock is still a small charity. But we knew that that issue very much affected the core existence of who Unlock was there to help. And we had to really fight to have a seat at that table. But if I look back, that was probably quite a key moment, because it made sure that we were then in a place where some of these decisions were being made. To skip forward a couple of years, in 2013, there were some changes to the rules around criminal records that came in following a separate legal case and some recommendations of that panel that I had been involved in. And so in 2013, there was what's known as a filtering system brought in. And we knew at the time, I think we said at the time, that it was positive but didn't go far enough. But we knew at the time that the law wasn't going to change any further than what it had done at that point. So we spent a lot of time gathering evidence of people that were affected by the law as it was then. And we, as part of that, got to know about a number of separate legal challenges that were being brought. And this included cases from Liberty, the human rights organisation, and also an amazing charity, Just for Kids Law, that brought some cases in relation to people that had been criminalised as children. And where that took us was to a decision that was made in 2016 that criminal record checks were ruled unlawful in terms of what they were showing. And we had provided a witness statement in the High Court to that case. We provided a witness statement to Liberty, and that was the first real role that we'd had in a legal case. And it was at that stage that our legal work really began to develop on this issue, because we could see at that point, in the way that the government were challenging that case, that it was likely to go all the way through the courts. And that's exactly what ended up happening. So in 2019, it was a time when we had no specific funding to do this work, and that's something I'll want to come back to later. We were preparing to look at what we could do to support this legal case. And what we ended up doing was something that Sophie referred to, which was launch what we called, because the platform is called Crowd Justice, and we launched a Crowd Justice campaign to help us raise money for our legal intervention. And as you can see here, I think that was the final total. We raised just over £17,000, which we were absolutely blown away by, actually. We never thought that we would get that amount of money, and that allowed us to cover our legal costs. We were working alongside and in partnership with the legal teams at Liberty and Just for Kids Law. And this really highlighted the benefit of our role in this case, because we could really see the benefit of bringing a perspective as a charity that was evidence-based, that reflected the wider issue. So one of the things that we did, and I'll come back to this later, was we focused our efforts on doing some research. And we published some research not long after that, in May, I think it was, May 2018, which got quite a lot of attention. And this was research particularly looking at youth criminal records. And we chose to publish that research at a time that allowed us to draw on it in our legal intervention. So we cited that in our submission to the court. And I always draw attention to this submission, which is on the screen, because this essentially cost us quite a few £1,000s to pay for, because that is what our legal costs went to paying. But we used that as a way of getting media coverage for the issue. And what I want to do, because my words on this issue probably don't do this issue justice, is I want to try, and we have just tested this in a roundabout way, showing you a short video, which if you can hear me, you should be able to hear the video. It's about 7 minutes long, and this is a BBC Newsnight piece that we did a lot of work on behind the scenes to end up being aired the night before the Supreme Court case was heard in June 2018. So if the technology backs me up here, I'm going to play a short video. And if someone can message me if this doesn't work, but hopefully we will be good.
Why should that split decision I made when I was a child, why should that affect the rest of my life?
The only thing I can remember about that day was my solicitor, who was a woman, saying to the judge, I can guarantee that this girl, you will never see her again. And I remember feeling that is so true, because clearly it was a terrible day, and I was very, very ashamed.
How long should a previous caution or conviction stay on your police record? And what should a potential employer be told about your past? That's at the heart of a case being heard here at the highest court in the land over the next few days. What the Supreme Court decides could make a real difference to people like Lee and Ellie.
Ellie Jones's interactions with the criminal justice system happened more than 15 years ago.
When I was 11, a friend and I went into the bathroom at the end of school, and we were playing around with a lighter, and we set some toilet roll on fire, and that was it really. The next day we were called in by the head teacher, and the police turned up, and I was arrested and given a reprimand. Because obviously arson is a Class A offence, it's a violent offence, which looks really serious on a record. And my mum didn't really want that for me as an 11-year-old, but the police told us at the time, just sign it because it will come off your record after 5 years.
Then, when she was 14, Ellie got into a fight at school and the police were involved again.
The police said that they were arresting me and I was going to get a reprimand. And at the time my mum said, well, she's already got one from when she was 11. And so she can't have another one. And they said, don't worry, it's going to come off when she's 19. It won't affect her at all.
But in the end, that wasn't true, as Ellie discovered when, as an adult, she decided on a career as a teacher.
When I'm applying for a job that I'm being paid for, like in a school, they see a box that's been ticked, that I have a criminal record. They see arson, they see ABH, and don't really give me a second chance.
Lee Hardy has a conviction dating back 30 years to when she was at university and had a part-time job in a pub while claiming benefit.
I picked up extra hours but didn't fail to stop making the claim for supplementary benefit. So I worked for 6 weeks over the summer, didn't give it a second thought until a couple of months later. Someone knocked on the door and it was an inspector from the Department of Health and Social Security, as it was then, saying that actually I'd been reported for making a false claim to receive benefit. Straight away I said yes. I didn't try to hide what had happened. Obviously I said yes, I've done that, it was wrong, I shouldn't have done it, and I was very remorseful straight away.
Aged 20, Lee was convicted of 3 offences of making a false statement, one for each time she'd signed on. She was fined £90 and thought that was the end of it. For years she worked in the NHS. As she rose through the ranks, although her criminal record didn't stop her getting jobs, when she applied for them she was horrified that it came up.
I think there's still a huge stigma. I think it affects more people than we would imagine. I've explained it to people I've needed to explain it to over the years. I had to explain it to my son, for example, to my husband, and they're not conversations that you particularly want to have, but I'm not the same person that I was when I was a 19-year-old student. So, why would that information be relevant to someone now thinking about whether I'm the best person for the job or whether I can take on a voluntary role?
We've all got used to criminal record checks, so-called DBS checks, when we apply for certain jobs and other roles. They're a way of preventing unsuitable applicants from working with children and other vulnerable people. But the case to be heard in this courtroom argues the government has got it wrong, that people are being unfairly penalised for past mistakes.
The cases include Ms. P, a woman who was cautioned for stealing a sandwich in 1999 and then prosecuted for stealing a book. She failed to appear in court because she was suffering from schizophrenia. That meant she was convicted twice, once for theft, once under the Bail Act. Also Mr. W, who was convicted of actual bodily harm in 1982 when he was 16. And Mr. A, who stole a coat from a market in 1981 when he was 17. When he was 18, he was convicted of stealing a motorcycle and driving without insurance. In 2013, the government introduced a filtering system which removes certain crimes from DBS checks after 11 years, half that for under 18s. But that doesn't apply in these cases. Multiple offences and violent or sexual offences continue to be disclosed for life. The government believes this policy safeguards children and vulnerable adults from harm. Tomorrow, here in the Supreme Court's Courtroom 1, it will appeal decisions that went against it in lower courts. Campaigners argue disclosing these records infringes human rights.
Clearly, if people have committed crime, there is a time in which that information may be relevant for jobs that they go to do in the future. But there is a time when that information should recede into the past and should be kept private. And at the moment, we don't have that line for many people.
Well, I think if someone has a criminal conviction, then prospective employers, for example, or charities looking to take someone on, do have a right to know about the person they're taking on. And criminal convictions, after all, are public. The government has already changed the rules so that very minor convictions, one-off convictions, after a period of time, are disregarded. So I think that balance between the individual's right to privacy but the wider public's right to know about someone's convictions has been drawn in around about the right place.
Our system is deemed far more punitive than other European countries, particularly, it's argued, towards people who commit crimes when they're young. They're paying a heavy price for their mistakes.
The blanket ruling that if there's more than one offence, it never goes, doesn't seem right to me. Because for me, it was one conviction. I did one thing wrong. I didn't understand, and still really don't understand, why that should never go. It was one conviction.
It's odd to me that we put a life sentence on a child for doing something stupid. Yeah, a slap on the wrist is one thing. Being told off by your parents, being told off by the school, but then being handed a piece of paper which is essentially a stamp that says you're a criminal for the rest of your life. It's really detrimental.
I hope you all heard that okay. Sorry if you could hear my microphone. I didn't want to put myself on mute in case it stopped the video. I wanted to show you that because I think that does a much better job than I can do of explaining the issue and why what ended up being a Supreme Court hearing the day after that was so important to end that injustice that many people like Lee and Ellie were facing. So in June of 2018, there was a Supreme Court hearing, which at the time we did a lot of work to raise awareness of. And so here there's an example of an article in The Guardian that highlighted the arguments that we and others were making in that case. What ultimately ended up happening was about 6 months later, in January of 2019, the Supreme Court ruled that the current regime was in breach of Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, and in particular in two aspects. So both Lee and Ellie's cases are quite relevant here, and I get quite emotional listening to them because they were both suffering as a result of the rules, and they were both benefiting now as a result. So the disclosure of youth cautions, the Supreme Court said, should no longer happen. And also the rule of more than one conviction would always be disclosed was also judged to be disproportionate. At the time, that was something that brought unprecedented media coverage for us. We saw massive increases in the number of website visitors, the number of people that were contacting our helpline. And I think what I reflect on being really important for us at the time was our communication efforts. So we were very much central to that case and producing lots of regular communications, particularly to people who this case had the potential to benefit. So people who were literally hanging on to what might happen as a result. And that takes me to essentially the next phase of this, which was a phase that dragged on for a lot longer than we had anticipated. That judgment was in January 2019. We had to write to the government in January of 2020, alongside Liberty and Just for Kids Law, the other two charities, because by that point, a year later, the government hadn't brought forward any plans to change the system. And it wasn't until late last year, so in the summer of 2020, that the government finally brought forward plans to change the criminal records regime. Now, this is really complicated in terms of changes, or at least understanding the context of the changes. If you are interested in the detail around this, the DBS, the Disclosure and Barring Service, published some information in November. The changes came into effect on the 20th of November last year. And the changes are actually quite simple. Essentially, childhood offences, childhood cautions, are no longer appearing on standard and enhanced checks. And by our calculations, that will help about 5,000 people every year that were applying for checks where they had things disclosing on them from when they were children. Another key change, which does impact even more people, is this so-called multiple conviction rule. That had meant that people like Lee, who had more than one conviction, would have them all disclosed essentially for the rest of their life. And we knew from Unlock's helpline that had meant that lots of minor convictions were showing up decades later. And the Home Office published some information earlier last year that showed around 45,000 people a year will now have a clear standard or enhanced DBS check. So Unlock has a lot of information about what has actually changed on its website. We spent a lot of time actually making sure that as part of our communications, we could explain those changes simply. So we have a brief guide that explains the changes. We published an infographic that sets out the different types of DBS check and what they show, because that is very complex. We published a lot of updated information for people with criminal records. And we also, as part of our work with employers, published information about what employers need to know in response to this change. And just as an example, this flowchart is one of the things that we published to really make sure that people understood what these changes meant to them, because it is complicated, and in many ways, people will only benefit from these changes if they know about them, because Unlock hears all the time from people who don't apply for jobs because they're worried about something that will come up. And yet when they find out that something no longer will come up, that can be a motivation for them to apply for something that they might not have done otherwise. So I've stayed away from explaining the detail around the changes because it is quite complex. What I wanted to do in the last sort of 5 minutes or so is just have a few reflections on how we went about this work and what might be useful for some other charities on the seminar this afternoon to really take away. So I think just to reflect on the phases of work for Unlock, I think it's quite easy to see this as, Unlock brought or Unlock was involved in a legal case, and that was what Unlock did. I think really there's a number of areas to this work that are worth drawing out. Firstly, there was real evidence of the issue that we had, but we also needed to get as well. So we did a lot of work to publish data that we obtained to formalize the people that were contacting us about their problems and really kind of present that issue in a way that was quite compelling. I also think that understanding that a change in the law was what was needed is also important, because, as I say, Unlock didn't wake up one day and think we're going to bring a legal case. It was, how do we get to a place where people no longer have to disclose these things? And I'm very mindful of charities and their relationship with government, and that is an important one. And Unlock has always, and I've always personally tried to make sure that we try to work collaboratively with government and officials. And on this particular issue, it was clear that there were going to be no changes to this policy. And so it was really clear that some form of legal challenge was what was needed to test the case. And so that really links into deciding that it was the right way to get change. We, as an organisation, knew that it was clear the government were resisting any changes, and it had already taken a number of legal challenges to get even some minor changes. Getting the legal challenges off the ground were probably one of the most difficult things for us, and recognising that we were not, Unlock is not a legal charity, so working in partnership with others like Liberty and Just for Kids Law, other charities, but also other organisations that are not legal charities, that are not charities, that are solicitors, that are legal firms, and really working in partnership with those, which took us to supporting those legal challenges in different ways. So yes, we intervened formally in the Supreme Court, but there were a good 4 or 5 years worth of work before that point where we did different things to support the legal challenges. And then finally, and this wasn't a phase that we anticipated, but getting a government response to the ruling. There was a lot of celebration when the Supreme Court in January 2019 said that the government needed to change the system. And then a bit of a, well, not a bit of a disappointment, a big disappointment when we were still waiting almost a year later for a government response. And it ended up being nearly 2 years before the law actually changed. So to recognise that that was actually a big chunk of work to make sure that it wasn't just a legal ruling, it was actually implemented. So in making it happen, we had to really be around in the long term for this. As I say, this started in 2009, so it was the best part of a 12-year project. And for me personally, I will reflect as it being probably one of the biggest things that I was involved in. We had a lot of evidence of the issue. The charity had a real determination to see changes, and I think importantly, and I want to draw on this point about capacity and resources, we didn't have, certainly not in the early stages, specific funding that said, that supported this particular work. We were in a place as a charity where we prioritized this, but it was only in the later years where we were able to find specific trust and foundation support, so particularly Esme Fairbairn Foundation with our employment work, Barrack Cadbury Trust in supporting our policy work. I think importantly, the crowd justice campaign that we launched that directly brought in funds to cover our legal costs. We had people donating to us that were personally affected by this. And then in the last year or so, support from the Baring Foundation in implementing the Supreme Court ruling. So there was a whole range of different resources that we had to bring to the table to make this happen. I've drawn on quite a bit of the partnership working, and I think that was crucial. We couldn't do everything, and it wasn't only our efforts that led to the success in this case. But I think what did ultimately was making sure that we were really clear as an organisation that this was the right thing for us to do, and to be really clear about that at all levels in the charity. So, our trustee board were fully on board with this, signed it off as a decision that we would take this forward. And I think that was also really important because it was a long-term commitment. Just conscious of time and questions. So this was, and hopefully is clear really, that it was more than just a legal challenge. It was reflecting on that constant contact that we were having from individuals, all of the stories that people were coming to us with, the research and the data that we collected and published, the media engagement and communications, that we did, the policy engagement with government officials, ministerial teams, shadow teams, MPs, and specific targeted legal activities is where the legal challenge really came in. So whether that be a witness statement or the Supreme Court intervention that we ended up doing. But then finally, just recognising that a legal challenge isn't enough on its own. So as I say, in January 2019, that was the ruling, but there was a lot more work needed to happen. The judgment only went so far. It didn't go perfectly from our perspective. There were nearly 2 years worth of delay before any changes. And now in January 2021, there remains a need for further and wider reform. So I just wanted to leave you with, I guess, where we are now. So alongside these changes, we have the Ministry of Justice having published some proposals to change some other parts of the criminal records regime, which reflects some of the campaigning efforts that we've made in recent years, and they are positive changes. And one of the ways that we've been able to really drive some of that work is working in some other ways. So it isn't just about legal challenges, it's about a wider puzzle and understanding where that fits in. And one of the things that we've worked closely with Transform Justice, another charity, another partnership, is on the Fair Checks movement, where we've encouraged people to show their support for reform by using this platform to contact their MP and to call for reform to the criminal records system. And that's just another element of putting pressure on the need for change and highlighting the different elements that contribute towards influencing policy. And that's something that's still open, so please do share that. We're keen to have as many people signed up to that and contacting their MP as possible as another way of achieving further change, hopefully, in the future. I think, Sophie, I did pretty well at sticking to half an hour, and that is where I wanted to get to before we paused for questions. So I'll leave you to maybe field some of those if there are any.
Oh, well, thanks, Chris. That was an amazing seminar, really interesting, and yeah, a true professional keeping to time. 10 out of 10. So yeah, we've got a few questions here. I'd like to come to Fran Key, actually. If you would like to ask Chris your question, we can unmute yourself. Hopefully you'll be coming up. If you're still there, Fran.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm here. Hello.
Thank you. Do you want to ask Chris your question?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. That was really interesting. I just wanted to know if when the childhood caution records now get waived and don't come up in checks, is that data still in the system somewhere forever, or do those records get destroyed after a certain time frame?
That's a great question. Thanks for that, Fran. So the short answer to that is that they are still there. What the earlier challenges in 2009, where this really started from, was that question of should the police still be able to hold this information? Should it be there? And in 2009, the outcome of an earlier legal case was to say, yes, they can still be there. And so it was at that point that we really thought about, okay, well, what are the problems that people were facing? And this isn't a complete truth, but most of the challenges that people were coming to Unlock about were the fact that information was being shared with third parties. So it was showing to employers and showing to others. And so that's why we and others went down the channel of challenging the disclosure of that information to employers on DBS checks. There have been some challenges to that retention of information by the police, but so far, at least, they have been unsuccessful. So in a legal context, I think it is quite hard to find a route to success on that. And that's something that really saddens me, actually, because that doesn't reflect my view that we should be keeping that information. But I guess it's a reflection that what we tried to do was be quite pragmatic in response to the challenges that people were facing. So Ellie, the lady who was in that Newsnight piece, she's somebody that I've worked with for years, and was delighted to hear that finally these changes came in for her, because she's a primary school teacher and is able to do that now. She will still find that if she wants to go on holiday to the US, for example, she will still have to get a police certificate where that will still show, and she'll probably have to go to the US embassy to get a permission to do that. And for us as a charity, that isn't right. She shouldn't have to do that. And I think there's a kind of pragmatism in this, which is about trying to be incremental in the change that we get. So it's it's kind of difficult one to be completely over the moon of.
Sure. Wow. What an answer. Blimey. Thank you.
That's okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Fran. So if I could come to Molly next, from Women in Prison. You posted up a question. If you'd like to answer it, ask it to Chris.
Hi, Chris. Thanks so much. That was really great.
Thanks, Molly.
You can hear me, right? Yeah. I'd love to hear more a bit about how you manage the media and like balanced press coverage with ensuring that people who were sharing their stories had a positive experience, and how you get different people, you can get different people from different places that might not necessarily fully agree with you, but you're also protecting people when they're sharing their stories.
Yes, and thank you, Molly. That's a great question, because I would be brutally honest and say I don't think we've got this perfectly right. And I think any small charity that thinks they have probably hasn't. Really challenging part to our work. That Newsnight piece is one of the rare times where we have put people. We haven't put people. People have chosen to be involved and identified in a personal way. Largely in our work on this and across other things, we have taken quite a strong approach to anonymity and protecting people's identity, not least because we're talking about a change that means that they don't need to be identified in this way in the future. So Lee and Ellie both now don't need to disclose, yet there's a Newsnight piece on YouTube that talks about their past. We did a lot of work to make sure that they and others that have done similar things with us were happy to do that and supported to do that. And that took a lot of work, and we worked quite closely with others in informal ways. So particularly Just for Kids Law have some great support around them to support people going through the media, and we worked quite closely with them and others. And I think it's fair to say we, as much as we could, we tried to be quite careful in who we worked with in the media on this. So it sort of saddens me, and I sigh to say this, but it won't be surprised that some of the media coverage that I highlighted there was in the Guardian, for example. And I have, and I don't mind this being recorded and being published, but I've often turned down media requests with people like Nick Ferrari on. I forget what he produces now, but you know what Nick Ferrari produces. So we've had to be really careful. I think what has surprised me is that, and whether this is by judgment or luck, is we've been able to overwhelmingly receive positive attention, even across some parts of the press that you might not expect. And partly that's been about, similar to my answer to Fran, really, being quite pragmatic about the sorts of cases that we are challenging and using and putting forward. So you're welcome to come back to me on any of that if I didn't fully answer the question, but hopefully that's helpful.
Sorry. No, that was really helpful. Yeah, I get. It's a really difficult challenge in terms of.
One thing I would just add, I think we worked quite closely with a few other organisations where we recognised that it was important to try to push the media side of this in a way that we might not have always done. So it wasn't by accident that Newsnight ran a piece the night before the Supreme Court ruling, for example. There was a lot of work that went into trying to get that happen. I can't say make that happen because it wasn't in our control to make it happen, but to try our best to help that to happen. And we have to give credit to other people that helped us helped us with that. But that wasn't by accident. I think a lot of our media work has been reactive, but this example of work was where we did some quite proactive efforts to try to seek that.
Brilliant, thanks, Chris. You mentioned in your presentation about like the getting a seat at the table. So we've got a question that's come in about that, about like what impact did the litigation have on your access to policy making circles? Did it open it up for you, or did you suddenly find yourself back out on the outside? Sort of interested in which way it went.
I think that's a great question, and so it came with its challenges. As a charity that has maintained an independence, I think, and a long history of being quite open to being honest and speaking truth to power, has meant that sometimes the charity has been met with some caution by officials and people in government departments, and this piece of work risked jeopardizing that further. I actually reflect on where Unlock is now, and on a personal level where I feel I am now, in that I think understanding what your role is and at what time and being clear about that, I think is understood. So there were times, and this is understandable, where the legal case was pending a hearing, and we would have wanted to meet with officials on some other issues, and those meetings didn't take place because there was a misplaced in my view, but understandable from officials' view, that those things might get confused. But where we are now is having built and maintained and grown those relationships even further. And I think recognizing what you bring to that and being kind of aligning these different things. So I think it's understandable if, there's a recognition that you're doing this because that's the right thing to be doing. Not that, and I've made a point to refer to this a few times, we weren't just seeking to bring legal challenges left, right and centre and just being a pain in the backside to government. It was a genuine effort to try to shape the law to get the right balance. And so it came with its challenges, and I think you have to be mindful of that. But in no way would I say that put us off from doing it or damaged us in the long term. It just came with a few bumps in the road.
Brilliant, thank you. And I don't know, you might have already kind of touched on this answer a bit, but like at the beginning, your presentation started with Unlock's objectives. So on one hand, you're directly helping people, and on the other hand, you're advocating for change. And obviously those two things go hand in hand. I was just wondering what advice you would give to other small organisations who may kind of currently just provide frontline services for people in the criminal justice system, and how they could begin to move into playing a bigger role in advocating for change. Do you think it does need that catalyst, that one key moment, like you're saying, that's that kind of genuine thing that facilitates that?
So I think it's about, without being sort of too detached or naive, I think it's about understanding whether a systemic change is a solution to the problem that or understanding what systemic change might be the solution to the problem that you're supporting people with. Because I don't think all problems have those systemic issues necessarily. But I think with ours, there was a really clear, obvious one to that, which is it was the law that was causing this problem. And so there was a solution within the law. And I think that Unlock has been really careful to make sure that it doesn't lose sight of that practical work and that need to provide that ear to the ground voice at the top, and that being a bedrock of Unlock's approach. And I think that's really crucial. As I said at the beginning, there's lots of different shapes and sizes of charities, some that provide solely frontline support, some that provide purely campaigning work. I think Unlock's approach has been to focus on an issue and span the spectrum across the two. And I think that's been to its strength. But it's also meant that the charity has had to be quite clear about those focuses, because Unlock is a small organisation, it can't get involved in everything. And that's maybe one other point that I would make. You know, you can't get involved in everything. You have to be quite targeted in what you do.
Brilliant, thanks, Chris. We've got another question. So could I come to Sam from Switchback, if you're happy to ask your question for Chris?
Look at that background, Sam. Very impressive. Can't hear you.
Can you unmute yourself? I can't actually see you. Sorry.
He doesn't look like he's muted.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I can't tell exactly what the issue is. So sorry, Sam.
I've got his question in the chat. I don't want to mute him. I think it looks like he might have audio issues. But so okay. Sam, please interrupt me, because I'd love to hear you voice this. But in the chat, he's asked, at what point did we decide that working collaboratively with government was not going to work and other tactics were needed? So I think we kind of knew all along. Certainly when I joined Unlock in 2008. There were legal challenges at the time ongoing that were clear to me that this was always rooted in a need for legal challenge. I think the question for us, therefore, was not whether legal challenge was right. It was more whether and to what extent Unlock got involved in it. And there are legal challenges going on at the moment to the criminal records regime in different ways, not just to do with people with convictions and cautions, some of which we know about, some of which we're not involved in, some of which we're supporting from the sidelines, some of which we're actively involved in. And so I think it was understanding what our role would be and at what time. Maybe to think about where the context of that kind of question from Sam might well be is, to what extent do you pivot from doing one activity to another? And I think for us, we really grounded our legal work in what we were hearing from the people that were contacting us. So I think in many ways that's what I would go back to, understanding, communicating to the group of people that you exist for, engaging with them and involving them in the work, and really collaboratively coming to a way of working that might well pivot from one strategy to the other, and being led by that, because I think that gives any charity the authenticity to justify the approach that they're taking, to say, this is very much driven by the needs and the needs of the people that we exist for. And I think in many ways we heard that very strongly, almost more strongly than what we took it on, insofar as taking legal cases. We tempered that somewhat and found the right way of doing that. But many of the people that we exist for would have us taking the government to court every day if we could. And obviously we can't. So finding the right way of doing that was important.
Okay, well, thank you, Chris, for fielding all those questions. Really good questions from everyone. So if we could move on, we just thought it would be nice to have a group discussion. If anyone wants to volunteer themselves, we'd be really grateful to hear some of the key points in your discussions, about what the challenges or opportunities are as you see it. So I don't know if anyone feels brave enough to unmute themselves and let us know how your discussion went.
I don't mind going for our group because I was just about to be typing them up, and then I thought I'm much better at just speaking, so I don't mind doing that for our group.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you.
So first of all, thank you for this session, Chris, as ever. Great speaker, and yeah, just really enjoying the session. It's a nice break from the afternoon. So I think I'll focus on question 2, because everybody in our group kind of hadn't had any experience of doing any challenges around legal work. So we were just thinking of the challenges and opportunities, and I just thought I'd highlight two really good points. One was that kind of an opportunity is to play to your strength. So obviously it's quite rare to have kind of legal expertise in a small charity, although not unheard of. But what you often have, as Chris talked about, is that kind of access to the voices and the power of the voice. So, you know, at Standout, where we have 120 people that have all got various experience of the criminal justice system. So we have access to that, so we can use the power of their collective voices. But as a group, one of the challenges of that is about managing the expectations. So I was thinking of an example. If we went to lots of people and said, look, what do you think about this issue? If you feed back your voices to us, we can help kind of amplify that and try and get some systemic change. But managing the expectation that just because somebody said something's rubbish, that's not going to have that instant reaction, as in the Unlocked case, it can take kind of obviously 12, 13 years. So just being really careful to manage expectations there. And I think, yeah, that might be kind of a good, I'll stop there.
Oh, thanks, Sarah. That's a really good point about managing expectations, definitely. Oh, my mind's just gone blank. I had something to say and it's gone. I've got Zoom freeze. Does anybody else want to feedback from their group some of the things that you might have had a discussion about?
I don't mind just mentioning quickly what we were talking about in our group. So I think one of the big things that struck me is CJ, who we were talking to, mentioned that we would like to influence change and policy if and where we have the capacity within our charities. But we came back to this point of capacity and discussed it in a few different ways. And we said that, kind of coming back to managing expectations as well, it's easy to say we want to make this change without actually realizing the amount of time and resource it's going to take for your charity, and it could potentially do sometimes more damage if you attempt to go into something and it falls through, and you might let people down who you may have made promises to and things like that. So definitely capacity is a huge part of whether you make the decision to take on a legal challenge. And we also just discussed as well about the kind of gap between many of our charities, which might be grassroots based charities, small charities, and people who are in the legal system and in government, and the groups of those people, and how the gap can be quite damaging when you're trying to make change, because a lot of us might not have the knowledge or the skills to transform our grassroots work into what they see can stand up in court. So those were the kind of points we raised, as well as many others. But yeah, thanks for giving us an opportunity to share.
Oh, thanks, Rowan, for feeding back. That's really helpful. Yeah, obviously capacity is a massive issue, especially for some of the, like you say, smaller or more specialist organisations, and that's part of what the Stronger Voice project wants to assist, to reach out so that those organisations do have a voice within, you know, whether it's commissioning or legal challenges, and you know, how we could probably best work in partnership. As Chris said, Unlock didn't do it on its own, it worked in partnership. And you know, I think now with the impact of COVID, we're all having to work in slightly different ways, and some of the opportunities that do come out of that is maybe that we can do more collaborative working. Last week at the first policy influencing seminar, there was mention of like the Never More Needed campaign, where, you know, a variety of charities and organisations have come together to put pressure to have that unified voice. So hopefully out of these challenges, yeah, there can be opportunities as well. Would anyone else like to feedback from their discussions in their group? We'd really love to hear from more of you. Is there anyone else? I can't really see who else is still here. So Chris did just ask if there's anyone else who would like to ask any further questions that might not have been covered earlier. We've got a bit of time.
Sophie, I think you might have had CJ possibly unmute himself and Sam possibly solving out his audio. So I don't know whether you want to take them in that order.
Oh right, okay.
That's okay. Thanks, Chris. There, I think I was just going to add to what Rowan so kindly made our notes and coordinated things there from. And I think one of the other things we looked at as well is the encouragement, because sometimes you can have people who are older in the charitable sectors and whatever, that have gone through a bit longer in the tooth and have had several of the battle scars along the way, and there's a role both for continuing in that side and continuing to challenge the systems, but also to be there to encourage and support some of the younger people who are coming on. And as Rowan here is saying, she's still at uni from here, she's gotten involved, and it's encouraging people who are younger with enthusiasm, that's wanting to change, making sure that they don't suddenly burn out early by coming across barrier after barrier. And it's being real with people and being supportive to people and aware of others around us who are trying to challenge. We may not be able to have capacity, as I raised from there, to challenge it ourselves, but what we can do is be an encouragement to others who have got capacity and enthusiasm. So I think there's two sides that we can work together with, and that's what I was going to add to it.
Thank you, CJ. Yeah, that's a good point, and a good reminder for myself, having worked in the criminal justice sector for, I don't know, over 15 years, and you know, being the optimist, but the cynical side sometimes does creep in. So yeah, it's having that capacity to believe that we can still make changes, you know, whatever the environment or the capacity that we've got, that we just all keep on moving towards that goal of improving things for people caught up in the criminal justice system. So I don't know if anyone else is wanting to feed back. If not, we are on time, so we're kind of coming to the end of our session. So again, I just really would like to extend my thanks to Chris.
Sorry, Sophie. I think Jenny Ann might be waving a hand, possibly.
Oh, sorry, I can't see everyone, so apologies. Would you like to unmute yourself?
I just got a question for Chris. One of the things we've come across many times in our campaigning work is where, if you like people who are intent on causing damage or enshrining discrimination will challenge a service supplier or even somebody like the MOJ, who then roll over and give in because they say we haven't the capacity to fight the action, so we'll just give in.
If that's that the government rolled over and give in, I wish I'd have experienced that. So no, I think there is a wider point. I sort of make a joke about that, but I think you're right, which is we shouldn't fall into the trap of thinking that, you know, everybody, that the sort of sides on this, and that people are intent on keeping problems in place. And it kind of links to that cynicism point, which I absolutely agree with, from CJ and Sophie. And I think where charities are genuinely bringing up from the ground the voices and the challenges that people are facing and taking those issues to officials, positions in power, and there's evidence around that, sometimes we'll be met with resistance, sometimes we'll be met with opposition, sometimes there'll be really simple and doable solutions that officials will be open to. And I think that's why styles and approaches are many and varied, and there's space for lots of those things. I think what I would epitomise Unlock as being an example of is adapting to those different styles. I think other charities have their style, and there's room for lots of different styles. I think smaller charities within criminal justice probably need to build up the arsenal, or ammunition isn't the right word because that sounds far too violent, but you get my point, like different strategies for achieving change.
Okay, so as you've gathered, I can't see everyone in the gallery. So if anyone else is waving, please do let us know and ask any final questions for Chris while we've got him. If not, I will just move to start closing the session. Yeah, as I was about to say, we'd just like to extend our thanks to Chris for presenting such interesting and informative seminar. And also thank you for all attending and for all of your contributions. Great questions. An email will follow with hopefully Chris's slides, if that's okay, and I'm just asking for your feedback as well about anything else that would be useful to you, because that can kind of feed into maybe some of the future sessions that we can put on. A poll is going to be popping back up in a few moments, so please do complete that just before you go. And as I might have mentioned earlier, we've got our third seminar coming up on it's Wednesday, the 3rd of February, and that's Mark Day from the Prison Reform Trust, and he'll be speaking about the role of influencing within their work. So please do sign up already, because I think there's only a few more spaces left. So unless, Chris, you would like to say anything, I'd just like to thank you, and you are free to go.
Thanks very much, Sophie.
Bye now.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.